The problem that we saw happening throughout the world at all levels, in education, in industry, in corporations, and institutions, that whenever you have a seminar, say you have 20 people, and you're trying to undertake some collaborative exploration on something, that generally you have 20%, 25% of the people who are very active, 25% of the people are very passive and reticent, shy, frightened, and 50% are in and out. And it generally is mediated by the center of power in the room. Well, in the early 80s, I and a couple of others who went along with me stopped blaming ourselves. And we began to really think about what was going on, and that this was happening worldwide. And what we realized was that this is a very deep cultural phenomenon having to do with power and legitimacy and credibility and risk and certainty, and that that's what was going on. And Touchstones arose from that environment. So someone in the third grade, you would come in and you'd reorganize the class into a circle. Right? All the students will be distributed one of our books for the third grade. It's called Touch Pebbles. And the teacher will read the selection aloud, whatever it is for that day. It could be an Aesop fable. It can be a short poem. It could be a piece from Aristotle. The 25, 30 students would come into the class. They'd form a circle. The teacher would sit with them. She or he would read the short text aloud and would say to them, as you're listening to this text, think of a question you would like all of us to discuss. That would be good for the whole class to discuss. And if you can't think of a question, mark a phrase that you find interesting. It would be like an Aesop fable, right? The tortoise and the hare, right? Okay, you might want to ask a question. They may think of a question about patience and persistence. Something like that. Something they know. I mean, it would be, maybe not in those words, but it would say, when you're behind, you keep going. In order to participate in a Touchstones student-centered activity, every student will learn to lead the discussion, as much as that student is possible. By the time they're in upper middle school or high school, they and the teacher are collaborating on the conducting of the sessions. Our mission is K to 12. Because we're really concerned about the next generation, but Touchstones is a program for all people. So we have programs for the elderly, we have programs for organizations, we have programs for adults, like the one I was doing last night in D.C. With lawyers and World Bank people. We have programs in prisons. Right now we're working out a program in the women's prison. Our assumption is that everyone coming into a Touchstones environment has both skills and weaknesses. So when I do a group up at the Harvard Club, these are people who speak in the imperative. And they give commands. I mean, that's why they're running Goldman Sachs. That's why they're running the New York Times, or Mount Sinai Medical. These are all people who have been in the groups, and they give orders. It's a little bit difficult for them to listen to others. In other words, to get out of themselves and hear what the other is saying. It's no longer adequate for a student to be a good or great student. Students, because new knowledges are always coming into being, have to learn to teach themselves. So from the very beginning, like in the third graders, asking the question for the class, what do you want to have happen in this class? They've got to take on leadership roles from the very, very start, because our understanding is that every student has to be a teacher of themselves and of others. The second skill, and this happens a lot with multinational organizations, and I will mention some of them that I've worked with, that in any problem that we're facing involves the collaboration of people from many different perspectives. It may always have required that, but now it's clear that it requires that. So that means that the physicist and the psychologist have to learn to collaborate. Now, even if they like one another, they have such different methodologies, they can't talk to one another. So the collaboration has got to begin from, say, the second to third grade on. That's what they've got to learn to do. And the third thing is that every problem that we're facing is new, like worldwide financial crisis, Ebola, terrorism. There's been never anything like this. And so in order to deal with these things, like in Ebola, everybody was treating it as if it were some disease they knew about, or terrorism. We've worked with people who were very involved in anti-terrorist activities, trying to get them to think about what their assumptions are in terms of the decisions they're making. Not at all. And so I think you need to build a framework that people are thinking collaboratively from, the third grade. In other words, they have to learn that they can learn something from one another, and they can learn things through their differences. When I was first working on Touchstones in the 80s in inner city Pittsburgh, I was in the worst performing high school in the city, Shenley High School. And there were kids there that really looked scary. These are a group of inner city kids, gang leaders, whatever. And at the end of the first year, they were having a conversation with a game from Touchstones. And one guy said about a guy who looked very scary, and what he gained from Touchstones, he said, whoever would have known that Antoine had a grandmother and a grandfather? So somehow they began to sense that these are human beings across the room. And sometimes there'll be outside observers from the class, other students, who will have drawn speech maps. And they'll be able to see who's talking to whom, who's listening to whom. In other words, what is the distribution of the participation? Is it all going through the teacher? And then they'll talk about how they can. You're always looking for a text at the very beginning where everyone is an expert, in a sense. And so we use a text called About Revenge, written in the early part of the 17th century by Francis Bacon. And it's a very conceptually cool text. Now, everyone in that room is an expert on getting even, whether you're a third grader or fourth grader, and they know as much about getting even as we do. They're probably more practiced at it than we are, and the text is used to give them some distance. You don't want to hear in school or anywhere someone's story about who stabbed whom on the street yesterday. That's not useful. But they understand why we seek revenge, and whether it's ever satisfying. And so the text is used to enable them to depersonalize their story, so they can reach the sort of guts of that feeling or that thought, which they all know about. And they can all talk to one another about that. In Cecil County, there's no hand raising in Touchstones. Okay? No hand raising. You have 20, 25, 30 kids in a room, fifth graders, and imagine running a discussion with no hand raising. But they begin to learn to anticipate who the speaker is. And in this sixth grade class, they were so good, they decided that in all their classes, they were not going to raise hands. Yeah, so there's a group of sixth graders up in Cecil County that even in regular classes, they're so skilled, no one raises hands. They know when to talk, when to listen, when to encourage one another. Now that's an amazing skill. I wish I had that skill.